and yet I still feel bad that I'm frustrated with the behavior.
Yeah, there you have it. Okay, the question has to do with the inclination to judge others and the desire to be surrounded by people that you don't feel the need to judge in a negative way. And then how much time you have to spend alone, given as a consequence. It's it's a very fine line because at the same time, you have to be able to discriminate between that which is uplifted and that which is not uplifted. Many people try to avoid judgment by pretending by everything is good, that everything is good, and it isn't. You know, evil is a force in the world. Satan exists. People become instruments of dark energy. People do cruel and unusual things that are hurtful to them and hurtful to the people around them. It doesn't serve us. A woman in our community was betrayed by someone she trusted on a very deep level. She was very hurt. It took her a long time to get over it. And at one point she went to Swami and said, well, everything happened just the way it was supposed to happen. It was all just right the way it happened. And Swami said, no, it wasn't. That person behaved very badly. Just like that, he said, do not comfort yourself with a lie. You know, and that's the phrase. You can't make yourself feel good by dulling your perception of reality. And it's the same as taking drugs or drinking. It's like, this world is too much for me. I'm just going to change my perception of it and then I'll feel good. But you're still out of alignment with what is. So you have to be able to look at things exactly as they are and then see the higher dimension of them rather than trying to make it good on its own terms. See, this is the whole problem with the planet. We have this idea, and it's very interesting if you really trace the idea that things are supposed to be different than they actually are. And we're extremely convinced of that, you know, that they're supposed to be different than they actually are, and therefore you should be different, and that should be different, and they should be different. But there's this principle that you have to understand, which is reality is stronger than your opinion. And you can have any opinion you want. I've often tell this story about this little boy. For a period of time, Ananda had this house, this huge mansion in San Francisco. We always live in the most expensive neighborhoods. You know, we had this huge mansion in San Francisco, 45 rooms, and like 20 people shared the house. It had this huge wooden staircase up the middle, and the acoustics in the house were terrible because it had all this beautiful wood, and so anywhere, you know, the noise would just carry. And there was this little boy who lived in that house for a few years. He was about 3 or 4 at this time. Very strong-willed person, extremely strong-willed person. And he woke up one morning about 2 a.m., and he was wide awake and he was ready to start his day. And the problem was everyone else was still asleep. And he finally found this so annoying that he got out of his bed, he walked to the middle of the house on the staircase, and in his very loud child voice just shouted out, I want it to be morning! He said like that. He just thought he could impose his will, you know, and the sun would suddenly rise at his command. And of course, the whole house, you know, wakes up. And the sun did not rise any earlier. So at a certain point, and you know, you asked me the question, you're beginning to realize this is not working very well for you. But you can go at it from multiple angles. You can try to love people. You can try to be more compassionate. You can have more sympathy for, you know, for the karmic consequences of their wrong behavior. Or you can ask yourself, why do I think the world should obey my ideas of who it's supposed to be? You can just go back into yourself and ask yourself, why do I insist that the world conform to me? Like, where did this idea come from? Where did the idea even come from that nobody has a right to grow? Everybody has to be born perfect. It's very interesting. A friend and I, when we very first came to Ananda, in fact, she was the woman who brought me to Ananda, who introduced me to Swami. She said, "I've met a real teacher and I think you'll like him." Those were her words, just for fun. Swami was always very natural and not at all fanatical. I was a food fanatic at that time and she was a gourmet cook. And so we were always I was always criticizing her. We were both very judgmental, that's where I'm going. She was extremely judgmental of me for my complete lack of appreciation for refinement in food. And I was always judgmental of her for her lack of appreciation of the importance of whatever I thought was important, including no sugar, no this, no that. When I got to Ananda, I had hardly eaten sugar at all for 5 years, and I was pretty sure I was close to samadhi at that point. Okay, I'm going to riff here for a little while. My first summer there, and I was so, just tense. And I was especially really strong on diet, and this business about sugar was a big deal for me. At that time, Ananda Village was so undeveloped that if we wanted anything, it was only available in Nevada City. We didn't have a market. So whenever people would go into town, stopping at Swenson's ice cream shop was always a big part of the journey, because we didn't have electricity, so we didn't have refrigerators, so we didn't have freezers for the most part, except in the kitchen that I ran, and God knows there was no ice cream in there, I promise you. So we go to Swenson's. We, in this point, is Swami Kriyananda and a couple of carloads of people. I think in memory, this whole experience has become exaggerated, but it happened very much like this. We go to Swenson's, and I think, and there was this long table. Swami sat at the head of the table, and as it happened, I sat at the foot for no particular reason. So I got a view of the whole thing. Everybody's passing the menus around. They're discussing the merits of strawberry and caramel sauce versus chocolate sauce, and do they want the banana or do they want the strawberry? It's huge, just party about the ice cream. And then everybody orders some big variation on ice cream. I say to the waiter, "A glass of water, no ice, please." And then all the ice cream arrives, and everybody, including Swami, and this is where I feel like it must be exaggerated in my mind, everybody's reaching across the table and tasting everybody else's, and they're pushing them all across the table, and I'm going, just sitting there like a mummy, drinking this little bit of water. But thank God, I looked at it and I thought, there's something wrong with this picture, and I think it is me. And that was the beginning of, it's a pure heart, not a pure stomach, that makes the difference. That's in the Bible too. It's not what comes into your mouth, it's what comes out of it that really determines who you are. So it was the beginning of understanding what are the consequences of this thought, and just something to consider. The consequences of your judgment of other people's errors is going to cause you to suffer as much or more than they will suffer. Because yours is a conscious rejection of the presence of God in others, and is a conscious rejection of the way of the opportunity for other people to learn. In some way to strengthen your own sense of commitment or sense of value or something. You're subtly crushing the spirit of others. And they feel it. You might as well just punch them in the face, because thoughts are that powerful. There were 2 women in our community, both of whom had unfortunate manner about the way they operated. And they just had this feud that just never ended. And we had a community, there was a community dining room, and one of the girls, I'll call her Mildred. Mildred is in here, and then Eunice comes in. Okay. And as soon as Eunice walks in, Mildred begins to scream at her. How dare you talk to me like that? Just like this. So it was such a hoo-ha that I heard about it. And so then Eunice comes in and tells me how outraged she is because Mildred was so mad at her, and how dare she, and I didn't say anything, I just walked in. I said, "What were you thinking?" And basically what she was thinking is, there's that dreadful person, Mildred. She just walked in with wearing a neon thought sign that said, Mildred, you're such a scumbag. And so she might as well have shouted, because Mildred immediately started defending herself. And, I had no sympathy really for either one of them. But that's what you're doing. So you have to ask yourself, do I really want to walk around and say, you're pretty awful and you're no very good yourself, and oh my God, I can't stand you. However, if you're an alcoholic, don't go to bars. Meaning, if you have an inclination to think ill of people, you need to treat that as a serious addiction. And you have to recognize that this is a poisonous habit. And you have to take it seriously to try to fight against it. And a principle to remember here is that nature abhors a vacuum, meaning that when there's an empty space, something will fill it. So if you have an inclination toward judgment, you can't just try to push away the judgment. You have to pull in another reality. And a prayer that I find very helpful is very simple. Divine Mother, bless us all. That says, I can't do anything about this, and I'm in as much trouble as they are. But Divine Mother, bless us all. So I'm praying for my own freedom, and I'm praying for their freedom at the same time. And then I'm not denying that they're unpleasant or that their behavior is misguided. I'm just asking God to help us all, because you're no better than any of the rest of them. Your particular shortcoming is just different. And we all, if you really contemplate your own helplessness in the face of your own delusions, if you really are sensitive, sensitive not just to yourself, but sensitive to the reality around you, you'll realize that every person who's doing something unwise is just as helpless and miserable in it as you are. So who stands above whom? We're all just in this together. Divine Mother, bless us all. You need a very strong prayer or very strong affirmation, song, chant, whatever works. You need to fill the space in your mind so that when judgment starts coming in, you can drive it out with another alternative. And what will work for you is going to be very personal, but you have to treat it. A woman friend that I was talking about judgment, but in her case, the judgment was always directed to herself, toward herself. And this woman was an avid camper. I said, when you're out in the woods, I said, if a rattlesnake comes in and bites you in the wrist, you don't sort of contemplate it. You don't sort of wonder, well, here's a rattlesnake. It was 3 feet long and it sank, let me see, 7 of its fangs into my wrist. You recognize this is a life-threatening emergency which must be dealt with on those terms. So you have to realize that this kind of a judgmental attitude is killing you, absolutely killing you. And so when it comes into your mind, you have to apply the antidote. You have to have a powerful antidote. And it's just a thought, and it is just a habit. That's all. It's just a habit. That's why I was saying, if you're an alcoholic, you don't go to bars. Which brings us to the other part, which is, but you can't control the environment you keep. One of the things that the people quote from Yogananda, to my mind, I think they overquoted. Environment is stronger than willpower is one of those phrases. I read that when I was 19. I said, not stronger than mine, which was a fairly stupid response, but there was also some truth in it, and that's why I feel it's overquoted. What Master was trying to say by saying that is, if you cut onions, your hands will smell like onions, and you can't pretend it won't. So if you constantly are in the company of people who bring the worst out of you, it would be wise to spend less time with them. However, maybe you live with those people. Maybe you sleep in the same bed as one of those people. It's not always so easy to separate yourself. So the more you can be in a positive environment, the more time you can spend in a positive environment. And these days with the internet, you can always put your earbuds in and listen to Swami sing or Swami Nirvanananda sing or Vicky sing or Master giving a lecture. So again, you also have to realize this is a life-threatening emergency. I do not have the leisure to indulge this. And literally, it will make you sick eventually because God will want you to get over it. And if you don't put out sincere energy to master it now, then he'll just up the ante and make it worse. And then you'll have to do it then. But above all, what you want is not merely to fight against what's troubling you. You want to actively infuse yourself with the balancing energy that will drive one thought form out of your mind. It's a very important point. I was very, very judgmental for a long, long time, and it was so transparent when I began to see it finally. You know, I was myself that I was judging all the time. I was always afraid that I didn't measure up, so an easy way to make yourself tall is to cut off the heads of other people. You know, but you don't really end up any taller, you just end up surrounded by headless people. All right, is there another question?
People pleasing.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Okay. What's the difference between being genuinely loving and just always wanting to make everybody else happy? Okay, there's a very good word that I find helpful, simple English word. And when love is also, just as you're saying, love is a word that is subject to many interpretations. And I know I've heard the modern phrase. I'm so outside modern culture, but every so often one of these creeps into me. Love language is what people say, which is, some of these things are very clever ideas because it really explains things. What's that saying is that love has many ways of expressing itself, and people become quite committed to certain ideas, or you become subconsciously trained in those ideas. But what we're actually asking is, true love is helpful, and true love helps people grow. Doesn't merely make them feel better in the moment, because often you actually disempower people by comforting them. When Swami would talk to us comforting too much, when Swamiji was helping us all get started in having more involvement with other people and being more helpful to other people, when he would talk about counseling, I know we have a lot of counselors in the room, he said, it's helpful, you need to be sympathetic, you need to be compassionate, but not too much sympathy. He said sometimes too much sympathy increases the delusion in someone's mind that they have really big problems. And you're not just trying to comfort them, you're trying to inspire them to go forward and learn whatever they're trying to learn and expand their own personal strength. So if you help someone, if you make someone feel better, and making them feel better causes them to lose incentive to face what they have to face and to grow, or even actually deprives them of the opportunity to face what they have and grow, are you actually being loving? Who are you loving? Who are you serving in that moment? Now, you're serving one's own need to look or seem or be in a certain way. So the first principle that we're talking about is simply truth. Love wrongly expressed is not truth, is not true love, is the way you could say it. It's just it might even be well-intentioned, but it's not wise. So the word I was coming to is the word is appropriate. And appropriate in relation to what is really going to help the people around you, and also really help you. Because when you act out of integrity with what is needed, then you're not loving anything. There's no love in this. Now it's just a confusion of energies of weakness supporting weakness. So first of all, one has to become very convinced about what the true objective is. And then the second thing is you have to become very sensitive to other people's realities. Let's see, how did this work? I was remembering this yesterday. I came into Swamiji's house once to talk to him about something that was really troubling me. And he was finishing a conversation with another woman, a counseling session. Sometimes Swami would have me in the room. Jyotish and Devi often said Swami would often have them in the room when he was counseling others, just to teach us, how. So this woman was, she was caught in a very unhappy romance, and she was very sad about it, and she was weeping, and Swami was being so sweet. He was just comforting her in the nicest possible way. And then, it was over and she left, and it was so sweet. And so I'm bringing Swami some big problem of my own at the time, which had to do with my phobia about writing. He'd given me a writing assignment that I just couldn't face, and I was in a nightmare of mental confusion. So I see that, oh, goody, I get to cry and he's going to comfort me. This is going to be terrific. This is really what I'm looking for. So in some context, and the details are a little obscure to me, but in some context I presented this issue to him, my suffering. And he was very distant. I'm waiting for him to pat me on the head and there, dear, sort of energy. That didn't happen. In fact, I must have been crying. I must have had my head down crying because there was no response from him. Now by this point in my life, I was often cooking for Swami. I was often sort of helping care for his house. Swami got credit for being very tidy at the end of his life, but he was not. He had a good staff, including me. So we kept his house very orderly. It was too much trouble for him to do that. So people got the impression that Swami was very orderly. He was not. He lived in creative chaos. He always knew what was going on in his house. He knew where every letter was and when it needed to be answered, but he didn't feel the need to stack it nicely. So I knew what was in his house, and there was this particular drawer. Okay, we had no electricity, so batteries, flashlight batteries, were an extremely valuable commodity. And because we had no electricity, we didn't have rechargeable batteries, so we just had batteries. And so your batteries they would die down a little bit, but they would still have some life in them. So they would be useful for one thing, but not for another. And batteries were expensive. So there was a drawer where we had semi-usable batteries and some kind of little device where you could measure to see what kind of juice they had left. As you can well imagine, it was very rare that anybody would deal with those. We would just put them in the drawer out of a sense of frugality. So I'm there. My heart is broken. My life is over. I'm dying because of whatever little drama I was acting out. I'm waiting for Swami to comfort me. And I hear this kind of sound going on. I look up. He's at the drawer. He's testing the batteries. I'm having a life crisis 4 feet away from him, and he's taken this opportunity to do something nobody ever bothers to do, and he's testing all the batteries like this. My God. I looked up and that was it. That was what I was going to get. And I was so mad, especially having witnessed how kind he could be, which of course he usually was to me also, that I was so mad. It was a writing project. It made me so mad. I went back to my house and I wrote the damn thing. And I wrote it really well. Okay, so that was the objective part of it. That, a few days later, Swami gave a satsang for the whole community, and I have never before or since heard him say anything like this. Asha faced a very serious spiritual test this week. If she had not passed it, she would have left the path. Yeah. I said to him afterwards, why didn't you tell me? He said, because I didn't think it would help you to know. Now that was appropriate. Was that kind? Was that nice? Was that comforting? None of it. I didn't think it would help you to know. And sometimes you have to stand back and let people crash. Because crash or succeed is what's needed of them. Yeah. All right. You're in charge. Am I able to read it? Online question. Oh, thank you. Your handwriting is very good and big enough. Okay. Oh, heaven and hell. Can you talk about what Swamiji said about those dimensions? Very interesting. I can talk about what Swami said, but honestly, what you really hear, read the death and return experiences. Those are the real humdingers about what's on the other side. And we had have a bookstore in Palo Alto, East-West bookshop, where a lot of metaphysical books, and the manager, in years past, the managers would often give Swami books that they thought he would find interesting. And there was a book of death and return stories. Most of them are, I went into the heavenly realm, I felt love, the angels came and got me, Jesus was there, you know. One of them I loved. I walked into a stadium full of people, of angelic beings, and they were all applauding me for having done my life so beautifully. You know, this is what we all hope for, you know. I'll take the door on the left. That's the one I'm going to go through. But this was a whole series of stories basically about people who went to hell. And Swami's comment was, well, of course some people go to hell. Not everybody goes to heaven. Not everybody deserves to go to heaven. However, they were people who went into a hellish realm, is what you would call it. I mean, the hell, the way it's presented sometimes dogmatically, is that you're damned or you're saved. Swami's simple comment, Yogananda's comment, a finite cause cannot have an infinite result. And a finite cause of any error that you make in this plane, it cannot have an infinite result. It doesn't have the power to do it. Also, we are here to learn from our experiences, and sometimes we have to take off our bodies before we see the whole picture. One of the most dramatic and interesting death and return stories was from a woman who committed suicide. And as soon as she did it, as most of the time when people return from that, it's like the instant you do it, you realize it was a mistake. But she was also, and this is about environment, heavy metal, which I know is a kind of music which by the grace of God I've never heard, but I know that it has a quality of consciousness. And this woman was extremely into that kind of music and actually killed herself while listening to some dark piece of music about the despair and the uselessness of life. And she immediately found herself in this place where all of these people, all these other suicides were present. And she said, and from the clothes they were wearing, she realized some of them had been there for a very long time. And the characteristic of that environment and all those people was that they were all slumped, looking down. In other words, they were still trapped in whatever the despair was that caused them to do it, now the sense of regret. I mean, the great problem with suicide, and among many things, is that it doesn't help. You know, if it would actually liberate you in some way, like who cares about the body? But the problem is it doesn't help, because whatever drives you to that is not dissipated merely by taking off your body. If you're depressed and you just change your clothes, you're still depressed. So that's exactly what happened. So she suddenly sees what's going on and how long these people have been here. And this is so interesting, every part of this. She said she was not a religious person at all, which is among one of the things that was her difficulty. But looking at all of that, the single word Jesus came into her mind. And she'd never loved Jesus or thought about Jesus, but she knew he existed. The word Jesus came into her mind. As soon as she thought that word, she looked up. And she realized that right above this place of despair, there were a multitude of angels, all trying to get the attention of the people who were suffering. You know, just trying to help them. And just the fact, and you can see, you think about the chakras, you think about Kriya, you think about the spiritual eye. She looked up. And as soon as she looked up, she was drawn up into the light, like that. And then the whole journey started, which caused her to come back. And then she made a life, both about suicide and about the dangers of heavy metal music, about the vibration of consciousness that creates. There was another story in that same book about a man who'd been a college professor, and he was extremely cynical about spiritual things, and he would do his best to dismantle any faith that any student brought into his class. He would make fun of them, he would mock them. He made a whole career out of that, which in our times you can be very popular doing something like that. And when he died, he went into a place where there was no hope. There was no future to aspire to. And he had the same realization of, well, I'm going to say, oh my God. I don't think he said, oh my God, because he didn't have one. But he said something like, what have I done? And then, because he experienced the state of hopelessness, and he realized that he had conscientiously tried to create that in others. So, what is hell? What is heaven? Actions have consequences. And when we're in a physical body, they say, our perceptions are dulled. The material plane is not subtle. When we take off our body, we're left with the vibration of our own consciousness in a vivid way, and we can't hide from it. And if we have behaved in a way that is devilish, we go to a world in which that's the vibration. And we either are forced to live through the consequences of our own actions, or we awaken from the folly of it. This man, when he came back, and he had the experience then of the falseness of what he'd been teaching, he repudiated everything that he'd done. He lost his career, he lost his marriage, he lost his reputation, but he realized that he'd been wrong. So how long does it take? But all that happens to us when we die is we go to the vibration that's appropriate for us. And if we're awake enough to learn, we begin to work our way up from that. I'll give you one other. This is not a death in return. This is a psychic friend. This man had the capacity to see into the astral world. And one of the things that he did, he was a well-respected college professor, so he was not a crank. He was a very highly educated person and a very clear-minded person, and he could just see the astral world. And he would help people by clearing out energies that were stuck energies. And what the heck, I said, come to my apartment, There were a couple of places in that house, one in particular, where the energy always felt a little dead. That's a double meaning there, but it felt a little lifeless. And I never had given it much thought, but it was just a spot. So he comes into the house and he tells me, after he does what he does, and then sprinkles holy water and salt all over the place, and he says, there was a Native American warrior there on his horse, he said, in a state of profound depression because of the last battle in which himself and his family, especially his children, were all killed. And he was so disheartened that he'd been unable to save them, that he was just trapped in this state of despair. And what do you know? Did he not know he was dead? I'm not quite sure. But my friend tells me that in the astral world, he's still on his horse, he's still in exactly the same moment in a state of despair. And right above him was the spirit of his daughter. And the daughter had been for a long time trying to get his attention. But he was so trapped in his, I'm weak, I've been disappointed. He was trapped in the state that there was no future, there was no change, this is the only reality. See, what is it when we get depressed or angry or entrapped? It becomes the only reality. And she was trying so hard to get his attention. We're fine. Look, we're fine. And my friend said he just got the warrior to look up. He looked up, he saw his daughter. And he just, galloped off to be with her. That's heaven, that's hell. It's really as simple as that. It's just a continuation. We're in hell right here, for heaven's sakes. Or heaven. It's just consciousness. And it's just a continuation, and consciousness is progressive, let's use that word. It's not fixed. So that's what we would say. When one of my friends was dying of cancer, beautiful lady, and she had a beautiful home, a lovely family, and she used to, every year at Christmas, her husband was quite well-to-do, and he was very generous, and she would buy Christmas trees and lights and make our temple really beautiful. Making beauty was what she just loved to do. And she was dying of cancer, and she was very brave, and Swami came to be with her. I might have put this in a book, someone else. There's a wonderful book called Transitions with Grace, written by a friend of mine. Transitions with Grace. Heard the stories in there. So she says to Swami, tell me about the astral world. And he says, because of your great love for beauty, you will go to a very beautiful astral world. And you will be surrounded by beauty like you've never seen before, and angelic beings, and everything will just be, will fill your heart. But then he says, but don't become too complacent there. He said, God is more than that. He said, you'll be tempted to be content at that point. He said, don't be content. But it was such an interesting combination of things. It was before. I think it must have been before, when she found out that she had a terminal diagnosis. This was the second cancer, and the doctors, she didn't live in our community. I had an intuition that I should go visit her that morning, and the doctors had told her that day that they couldn't do anything for her, that she had to get ready to die. And I was sitting with her in her beautiful home with her picture of her children. If she was in her 50s, that was all. Yeah. The oldest was like early 20s. And she's just weeping, and she says, how can I leave all this? How can I leave all this? And because I knew how spiritual she was, I said, it's a wall of fire and a river of tears. And you're going to have to walk through the fire, and you're going to have to cry all those tears. But on the other side of it, it'll be all right. And then when she was actually dying, I was away, and I got a call, and I went back to where she was. And I just remember she's lying on her deathbed, and she just looks up at me, and very quietly she says, you were right, like that. But it was a wall of fire and a river of tears. We're in hell and heaven right here. We don't have to go anywhere else. What is your consciousness now? That will be your consciousness then. A little bit better, or a little bit worse. But if your intention is good, that's what really counts. But pay attention. This is the question you asked me. Offload it now. Get rid of everything that you can get rid of now. Because when I've had hard karma, I say, having this karma once is one time too many. I don't think I want to see it again. So work as hard as you can to get free. Yeah. All right. Other question? Maybe the other side of the room? Yes, there we are with a lot of energy. Okay.
What are the teachings involving if one were to come into contact with like a negative or evil entity here and now?
What about when you encounter evil entities here and now? And you can encounter evil entities that are embodied in physical bodies or acting through physical bodies. There is such a thing as evil people, and you're also talking about evil spirits. Yeah, I understand. There was a woman who came to us many years ago at Ananda village. She'd had a horrible upbringing. She'd been on psychiatric meds for most of her life. She was very wealthy. She'd inherited a great deal of money from awful parents. Things somehow go funny. At that time, we didn't have any money at all. And I'm pulling up my arms because some of us wear these these bangles that Yogananda recommended. Both Vicky and Ishadas wear them. It's a combination of gold, silver, and copper in a special combination that strengthens your aura, which gives you more magnetism, enhances your magnetism. Gemstones also have the same effect. I wear gemstones on this side also. This is all an autobiography of a yogi. I'm just talking about this woman. She, this bangle at that time costs $150. Costs about $3,000, I think now. It's all about the price of gold. This woman bought all of us, like she bought 25 of these bangles, which was a phenomenal sum of money at the time, for all of the core members of Ananda. Swami had these 24 bangles up and down his arm, and then all day long he would take them off and hand it to us. So she was generous, and she was mentally unbalanced, and she'd been tortured, and she was possessed. And we took her to this Ayurvedic psychic doctor, and he just said she's possessed. She has these, because her mind was so scrambled, she didn't have the strength to hold these entities back so they would work through her body, work through her senses. Okay, now bear in mind, these, quote, evil entities are just bad people. They're just people. They're nothing. They appear to have more power because they're on the other side, and they may be powerful in their evil, just as many people on this planet are powerful in their evil. And furthermore, this psychic told us, which was true, that when this woman was asleep, these entities got bored, so they went around and looked for others of us to bother, which is very interesting because I was asleep in my little tiny trailer, which was right in that area, and they came into my place. I wake up like that in the night, and I was terrified because I could feel this force. Now, of course, I was afraid, and fear is the link. Because as soon as I was afraid, there was a huge hole in my aura. And, I had to get up, and I had to light. I had very little experience with this. I had to light the lamps, and I started chanting, and then gradually I calmed down, and they went away. But here's the interesting part. My friend, Seva, who has a very different temperament than me and who's very, very compassionate and helpful to everyone, they came to visit her. I don't think it was that same night, but on another night, she sat up in bed and she said, "What are you doing here? This is not good for you. Why are you behaving like this?" She just saw them as naughty children who needed to be scolded. And she just stood up against it like that. And there was no connecting link because she wasn't afraid of them. Okay. Now, I'll balance that with Swami Kriyananda when he was first in the ashram at Mount Washington, and he heard about the possibility of disincarnate entities, which is what these are. These are ghosts, people who die but don't want to be dead. They want to be in this world. They want physical experience. They're looking, or they're just naughty and they want power. Entities like that, Master said, go to bars and whatever be the equivalent of opium dens. They go to places where people willingly surrender their own willpower to some other force. And then because they can't, if you're strong in your own consciousness, they can't penetrate. But if you have surrendered your will, if you're habitually empty-minded and passive, this is why you can't think of meditation as an empty mind. You have to fill it with divine vibrations. But if you're very weak-willed or habitually intoxicated or drugged in one way or another, disincarnate entities can take you over. Sometimes people will tell you they got very drunk and the next thing they're in jail for doing some violent thing that they don't remember. Because in many cases, they actually didn't do it, but they surrendered their body to something else, someone else. Okay, so these are very real. And so Swami heard all about this, and he was very interested in it, fearlessly interested in it. And so he said he had a dream. This is in his autobiography. He had a dream, and in the dream he realized, oh, he's about to meet a disincarnate entity. And he went to some big hall, and he started hearing an Om vibration, which he was used to hearing, but it started becoming more and more dissonant. And then there was this ever-increasing feeling of darkness and evil in the room. And then all of a sudden, he said, he felt that the power of the consciousness of that evil entity was going to be bigger than Swami's capacity to hold on to his own consciousness. In other words, the evil was trying to invade him. And at that point in the dream, it was really a super conscious dream, Swami said, this is dangerous. And he said, Master! Instantly, everything changed. Because Master's power was greater, because he was just a naughty person. So we have to both respect it and don't think for a minute that we should tinker with this sort of thing. But we also have to realize the light of God, one candle in a dark room illuminates the room. But evil exists, and evil has a great deal of power, and it's not anything to just dismiss and just pretend, I can just be on the edge of this. This is why good environment is very important. And this is why what you bring into your consciousness really matters. And I don't know what the musical tastes of people are in this room, but don't get me started about modern music. It's not a joke. It's horrible. And it's just twisting. I mean, there's many reasons why we are a dying civilization, but that's one of them. So don't mess around with it. Ask yourself, what are you looking at? What is your environment? Insofar as you're able to control it. Look at it and make sure that there's nothing in it that's going to infect you in a bad way, especially what you listen to. The music, the voices, the news, whatever it is, pay attention. Because the forces of darkness, I call it shadow. And I know that's a common word and it's well used, because shadow is not an alternative reality. Shadow is caused when you block the light. So shadow itself is an aspect of light. If you say darkness and light, then you're actually talking about two different forces, and there's not two forces. There is light, and then there's blocking the light. So it's the shadow that you want to push aside. And these poor evil entities are going to suffer, are suffering, and then we'll learn, and then we'll go on. My friend was compassionate, I was frightened. Big difference. Okay, let me take one more and then we'll take a break. The balance between the capacity to initiate and make things happen, and God is the doer. Swamiji said, many beautiful gifts that God would give to this world are never received by this world for lack of a willing instrument. So we have to start by saying the capacity, even an exaggerated capacity to make things happen, is still a divine gift, and one should never think that one should become weaker or more passive. In my early years of Ananda, there were two women in my life. One was a lifelong dear sister. The other was the enemy from many incarnations. And most of my first 10 years were spent in the company of both of them simultaneously. And I had terrible problems, you might imagine, with the enemy. And early on, I came up with what was one of my dumber solutions. About 3 times in my life, Swami was extremely frank with me in the way I'm about to describe. I came up with this idea that the problem was not that I dislike this one, but that I love the other one too much. So I said to Swami, the problem is I love this one so much that the contrast between how I feel for this one and how I feel for this one, that's the contrast that's the problem. So if I love this one less, there'll be much less of a contrast. He said, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. I think he said that to me twice. I can't remember right now what the second one was. But you want to go with your strengths. You don't want to diminish them. And your strengths are what's going to carry you to heaven. In a metaphorical sense, speaking like that. So has nothing to do with your own will or your own will capacity to make things happen. It has to do with your attunement. Where are your thoughts coming from? And how stubborn are you in your thoughts? And how egoically committed do you get to what you think? And how much am I getting my self-worth out of all these talents that I have? And how much do I enjoy the fact that, well, of course, you're not as competent as I am. How much of that is going on? That's the actual issue. And you don't surrender your ability to move energy in this world because God really wants people who can move energy in this world. You just have to become more sensitive to where your inspiration is coming from and what that inspiration feels like. And it has to do, above all, with intention. What am I trying to accomplish? And am I trying to serve God, or am I just trying to look good in the eyes of others, or look good in the eyes of myself, or even worse, earn God's love by being competent, you know? So the practice is all the time. And the practice is a constant reflection back. In 1981, Ananda Village was having so much trouble with the county planning board over land use because we were such an unconventional development. And the only entity in California that would have control over its own land use was a municipality, which is a city, a California city. Only at the end did I realize city has two ways of spelling, C-I-T-Y, city, and S-I-D-D-H-I, siddhi, which means divine power. It's a Sanskrit word. So we kept calling ourselves a city, C-I-T-Y, and then at the end we became Ananda Siddhi, which was much better. But we never became any of it. But we were a farm. I mean, there wasn't the slightest look of Ananda City at all, period. We were a farm. But law, as one of my lawyer's friends said, law is not intuitive, law is not rational, law is political. It simply is what it is. So, technically, we could make Ananda Village into a California city, and we could get power over our own land use. For 18 months, it was my job. It was extraordinarily controversial, opposed by everybody but us. And each public hearing was in a larger and larger hall until we were in the biggest hall in the county, and there were 800 people in the room, and everyone was against it except us. So, surprise, surprise, we didn't win. You know, they didn't vote for us. The board didn't have the nerve. Okay, 18 months I'm on this, day and night. And then we lose because the county board ignored the state attorney's ruling that our religion could not be a factor in the decision. But they made the whole decision on the basis of all this negative testimony about our religious practices. So the whole thing is over like this, and there were two other women who both were actual attorneys. I was just attorney by reincarnation, but they were actually real attorneys. The three of us, by now it's national news what we're doing, because Rajneesh was taking over in Oregon City at the same time, so we were always paired with them. There was no parallel, but they didn't know. It was a better story. So three women are standing in front of the news cameras. We will appeal. You know, our rights have been, religion, blah, like this, blah, 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 like this. This is me starting the French Revolution. There I am. About 2 days later, this camera crew comes up from Sacramento, which is the capital city of California. They come up, and at this time there's no telephones, and there's this long dirt road. There was no paved road to Swami's. So they're coming up to film Swami Kriyananda about this whole thing like this. We're going up, I meet them, I'm in the car, I'm driving them up. Our rights have been, we're going to appeal, we're going to get this, freedom of religion, like this. We get to Swami, so there's a point to this story that's related to your question. You'll see. We get to Swami's house, and Jyotish was already there, and then Swami says in a very dynamic way, if you'll give me, 10 minutes, I'll give you a real scoop. He says scoop. I remember him using that word. And I say to Jyotish, what the heck is he talking about? Jyotish goes kind of ashen and says, you don't know? I said, no, I have no idea. So Swami sits down, he starts reading this prepared statement. And I, being a wordsmith, in the first sentence, I realized the project is over. We're abandoning it. It's in the past tense, right there, like this. So as soon as he finishes telling everybody that it's all over, naturally they put the microphone in front of me, and fortunately I'm adept, and I say, of course we're abandoning it. Why would we go forward? You heard what he says, And all the way back down, I'm telling them all the reasons why we're not going to do it anymore. These reporters talked to a lot of politicians. They weren't fazed at all. The fact that I just changed my tune. So then I wave goodbye to them. I get in the car. I go back up to Swami's. I say, what? What is this? And he said, he was so sweet. I think he patted me on the head. I'm so sorry, he said, but there was no way to let you know. I said, what happened? He said, I was meditating this morning, and I asked Master what we should do, and I strongly felt that when a religious entity tries to get secular power, it never works. That the founders of this country were correct. He said it eventually corrupts them. He said they made the right decision for the wrong reason. And I said to Swami, I'm the one who's been working on this project all the time. Why didn't Master tell me? Swami said, did you ask? I said, no, sir. And he just shrugged his shoulders. I laughed, shrugged my shoulders. That was the end of the conversation. But you can see how vivid that was. I became committed to what I was doing. I did not become committed to doing what God wanted me to do. I just made the assumption that if he wanted it yesterday, he would want it today. And I don't mean by that that you keep pulling the plant up and looking at the roots. Okay, Mother Teresa of Calcutta was being interviewed, and they asked her about whether her nuns were actually as effective helping the poor as a government NGO or an NGO would be helping the poor. Statistically, the NGOs helps more people than you and your nuns help. And Mother Teresa just looked at the reporter and said, I'm not helping poor people. And the journalists were completely bewildered. She said, I'm doing what Jesus asked me to do. That's the whole story. What are you actually doing? For me, with the incorporation, I went through the stages. I didn't mind giving it up because if I was doing what Swami asked me to do. If he didn't want me to do it, I didn't care. But I said first, sir, I've gotten to the point where I don't mind losing, but it does irritate me that they won. You know, I'm still annoyed that they won. Then of all things, I got a very high fever for about 3 or 4 days. And when I got it from that, I didn't care. You know, it was over. I'm doing what Jesus wants. Don't get confused, okay?